week's edition of a World Crisis Radio. This is your host, Webster G. Tarpley, Ph.D., speaking from Washington, D.C. It's been a partly sunny day here on the banks of the Potomac, a little bit warmer than the previous days, but we are here in the autumnal. It is, as we're recording, the last day of November 2018. The last day, and by the time you hear this, it'll be December 1st. We're already in the season of Advent, for those of you who are keeping score. Now, this has been an epoch-making November, and in particular, the stunning, devastating defeat of the reactionary to fascist Republican Party continues to reverberate through so much of the political landscape, and it's a dramatic kind of change that we're living through. And let's try to get the big picture before we have anything to say about the smaller details. This was a blue wave. There is no doubt. Anybody who denies it should be institutionalized. Trump needs a canvas blazer and somebody coming after him with a net if he thinks this was a victory. He knows, of course, in his heart of hearts that it was not a victory. It was a defeat. Trump is now branded forever with the stamp of the biggest loser since Nixon. He's already the biggest loser since Nixon in terms of the losses in the House of Representatives, as that decisive chamber, the people's house, is about to flip. We've now got, We've got about 32 days? 34 days, I think, as of today. By the time you hear this, it'll be 32 days. 32 days of reactionary fascisto-Republican domination of the House. And then it changes. And that will be a shockwave radiating out into the political sphere. Many, many things will change. For Trump, it will be a new world, and it will be one decidedly not to his liking. He will experience this as an endless calvary, if I can make such a comparison to such a vulgar and profane individual. And indeed, the Democrats have not stopped winning, and Trump's Republicans have not stopped losing. You say, what am I talking about? Right? Supposedly this was all wrapped up this week. No. Here we are in North Carolina, right? The place that has developed some of the most extreme racist, fascist voter suppression mechanisms, right? Surgically tailored to attack minority voters, and I'm sure also poor voters, older voters, younger voters. You've got to be a middle-aged person in the affluent suburbs with racist overtones for the Republicans to decide that you have a right to vote. So here's an area along the South Carolina border, and this is the 9th Congressional District, North Carolina 9. There is no certified winner, and it could last indefinitely. State election officials are investigating whether hundreds of absentee ballots were illegally cast or illegally destroyed. Now, this is where vote fraud can occur. It's not voter fraud, as Karl Rove and other fakers have tried to describe it. No. This is vote fraud. It's done in an organized way, an industrial scale. It's gang fraud, and it's top-down. It's often done with computers. Sometimes you have to make these ballots disappear, and we have to remind old Rachel Maddow, it doesn't matter if the ballot got lost in the wrong folder. That means nothing. Is it a valid ballot cast in this year's election? If it is, you've got to count it. And she doesn't seem to get that part, right? I guess she has no connection to, a machine, normal Democratic, small d, politics. So here we are, North Carolina 9. The North Carolina State Board of Elections and Ethics Enforcement has no plans to certify the victory, what was thought up to now, by Republican Mark Harris. Mark Harris had been thought to be leading by about 905 votes. 905 votes, a margin of advantage for Mark Harris, Republican, over Democrat Dan McCready. And there's going to be a meeting about this Friday morning. That would be already going on. And they're collecting sworn statements. And here's the way the vote fraud worked. People came to their doors, urged them to hand over absentee ballots without filling them out. Receiving absentee ballots by mail that people had not requested was also a common phenomenon. And in North Carolina, it's illegal to take someone else's ballot and turn it in because you may fill it out in the meantime. So if that one holds up, if that one flips, it will then be 41 seats gained by the Democrats. And naturally, this is welcome to me here because my forecast for this thing, my prediction, was the Democrats would gain 42 seats. 42 seats. So we're now just one seat away. Who knows what it will be in terms of pickups, and that includes pickups from all purposes. So again, as of right now, if one district in California, I think, holds up, it's going to be a plus 40 gain for the Democrats. And if this North Carolina seat goes in the other direction, that will make it 41. So it's also interesting in passing that this precise question, the North Carolina vote fraud, voter suppression, racist, this is denial of civil rights, right? You need the racist in order to get to that, but it's a denial of civil rights, and therefore the Justice Department should be all over this case. Where's the Justice Department? They're AWOL. It's funny because the Justice Department was actually founded, at least it got going in a serious way, under President Ulysses S. Grant, right, the sword of the Union. And he needed a way to go into these former Confederate states and fight the Ku Klux Klan. The whole purpose of having a Department of Justice starts with the idea of fighting the Ku Klux Klan. And we know also from the distinguished scholar of modern fascism, Paxton, that the Ku Klux Klan is actually the most prominent 19th century precursor of the European fascism of about 1918 to 1945. The Ku Klux Klan, fascist. So it's not something exotic. It's something quite indigenous, autochthonous. So this is North Carolina. Now, the guy who, by all accounts, designed this odious system of voter suppression and disenfranchisement, right? By the way, he's violating the 14th Amendment. If you read the text carefully, you'll see that in the 14th and especially the 15th Amendment, it says if you deprive people of their right to vote, then that number of votes will be subtracted from the census totals for your districts. In other words, you will be docked. You will be deprived of representation in Washington if you insist on taking away people's right to vote. So with this, Farr is defeated. We'll continue with the story here on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C., from the nation's capital on the banks of the Potomac. Another week closer to the end of the Trump regime, and another week closer to the disintegration and extinction of the Republican Party. That's the immediate perspective for the next couple of years. We don't need the Republican Party. We need to be liberated from it. It skews the political axis of this country too many degrees to the extreme right of reaction and indeed fascism, with its policies, economic policies that can only be called genocidal. In other words, that threaten the lives and the health, the longevity, the welfare of the American people. Amazing, but this is what it comes to. All right, so look, this is a huge defeat. Again, some people are still hanging on to Trump's really psychotic statement on the day after the election, right? That is such a great victory. And of course, that is complete, that is delusional. So the counting still goes on, right? And there may be other surprises, who knows? But now what we were getting into is this character Farr, a lawyer from North Carolina. It turned out to be a bridge too far, even for the Senate Republicans. They couldn't handle this guy. This is the guy whose handiwork was essentially condemned by a federal district judge, that this was surgically tailored to try to suppress the minority vote. So naturally, the Republican Party wanted to reward Farr for his yeoman service in disenfranchisement, voter suppression, depriving people of civil rights. Yeah, let's make him a federal district judge so he can go and defend his own handiwork. Would he recuse himself? Probably not. These guys are unethical, if you know what we've seen. So anyway, this guy Farr was going to be made a federal district judge, and, he was defeated. And the defeat is now the combination of Senator Flake of Arizona, right? Lame duck senator, outgoing, didn't run for re-election. This is now the seat going to Sinema. But Flake has said, Mitch McConnell, he's talking to, if you don't pass the bill protecting Mueller from being fired without a role for the judiciary, some independent, non-Trumpian review, I will not vote for any of your judiciary picks. And it was all those federal district judges and especially federal appeals court judges that are there. Farr says, no, Farr was one of them, and Flake says, no, I'm not going to vote for them. So good for Flake, finally doing something. Of course, the limits of this are clear. Trump would veto anything like this. Would it ever get through these zombies in the House? Would the Freedom Caucus ever allow this to go through? No. So it is sort of bootless, but Flake at least has done something. He's defeated this reactionary Farr, and he was then joined by Scott, senator from South Carolina, the only black Republican in the Senate, who said, look, this character is part of the racist problem. Certainly he is. So Farr is defeated. Now, will they bring him back in January? That I don't know, but it's, of course, possible. So, but anyway, for the moment, he's defeated. Now, the reason this is important is that Trump's lockstep, the Trump machine, right, the zombie-like lemmings of the Republicans on the Hill, this is now in disarray. And in particular, yesterday, or actually on Wednesday, we have the Senate voting on what to do about Saudi Arabia, and above all, what to do about the war in Yemen, generally ignored by U.S. public opinion, by the controlled corporate networks. There's been this war going on in Yemen, which we have condemned and do condemn, and it is waged by Saudi Arabia, except that Saudi Arabia is logistically too weak to wage this on their own. They have to have U.S. Assistance, should that assistance be forthcoming. This is giving the U.S. a very bad name everywhere, deservedly, because it's genocidal. This is where they have blockade of food coming in. So it is the worst humanitarian crisis on this planet at the present time. The U.S. is the enabler. This has to end. So a procedural vote this Wednesday turned out to go against Trump and his gang. This was a 63 to 37 vote. So it means that there were 16 Republicans who broke with their party, and they turned against Trump. Approximately that number. So this came in the wake of this briefing incident, right? The senators want to hear about Khashoggi, and they got a briefing from Pompeo and from Mattis, right? Secretary of State Pomposo and Defense Secretary Mad Dog Mattis, but not Haspel of the CIA. Well, we had warned about her inherent weakness, and now we see it. I would also add, not much mentioned, practically non-existent, is Dan Coats, right? The Director of National Intelligence would have been somebody who should have had a say about this. So they didn't do it. So the senators were offended in their collective egotism, I guess we can say, and therefore they were in a bad mood, so they voted against this. Now, this is only the first step. It's only a procedural vote, but eventually this could become a law saying the U.S. is ending its role in Yemen. Trump could veto that. If he does it this year, that might be veto bait. So veto bait, I mean, it could be overridden. It could be unsuccessfully vetoed and therefore overridden. So that's what we're hoping for. So these are the signals of the disintegration of the Trump machine, right? This lockstep. We've also got Lindsey Graham, right, switching back away from his bootlicking obsession of the past couple of months, and now he's a tough critic. He's not happy that he didn't get the truth about Khashoggi, and he's angry with Trump. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. To World Crisis Radio, Webster Tarpley speaking from Washington, D.C. So, disintegration of this Trump lockstep, this discipline that his personality cult has imposed on the various Republican denizens of the Hill. Remember, the Republican Party is literally collapsing. It is dissolving before your eyes. In California, as we went through this past week, I guess it was, the Orange County Republican Party, the birthplace of the Goldwater hysteria, later on the springboard for Reagan and his reactionary Reaganomics, the great U-turn of falling standards of living, all of that came out of Orange County. Money for oligarchs, but not for working people. That's their view, but that has now failed them. The Republicans failed them, right? The Republicans is not enough to be in the top 1% or the top 1/10 of 1%. You got to be in the top 1/100th of 1% or 1,000th of 1% to get anything out of the Republican rule. And a lot of them, that was a bridge too far, as we said before. So in California, Orange County, completely Democratic, only very fewer than half a dozen members of Congress left in the whole state. Party is moribund. It'd have to be rebuilt from the bottom up, but that's not going to happen. And we're not for it either. The Republican Party, the crimes of the Republican Party merit its disappearance from the historical stage, as much as the Federalists, as much as the Know-Nothings, as much as the Whigs, and many others. In New England, that whole group of 6 states, there's only one Republican elected official in Congress. It's Susan Collins, the embodiment of hypocrisy and double dealing. So we hope very much that she will soon lose her Senate seat in Maine, at which point the Congressional Republican Party will have disappeared from Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. No more GOP going to the Hill. Similar situation in New Jersey, a populated and suburban state, right? New York suburbs, Philadelphia suburbs, and only one Republican left, right? One Republican left in northern New Jersey. Now, the one thing, and this will be our constant theme, what's the biggest danger to the Democrats now as they try to fill the void left by the collapsing Trump regime, Trump machine? It is austerity. Austerity under any name. That includes especially taxes, which are more burdensome for the lower income brackets than they are for the rich. In other words, regressive taxation, an attempt at a grand bargain to restrain the social safety net, right? Somehow it's time for cuts in Social Security and or Medicare, right? You would think that after winning an election based on preserving Obamacare and similar issues, the Democrats really ought to be immune to cutting the social safety net. But you don't know that. And remember that the first term of Obama and even halfway into the second term, Obama was committed to gouging Social Security with the chained consumer price index to actually reduce the value of the benefits. And in particular, the most insidious form this takes now is green jobs or a green New Deal. What does it mean? Green jobs, going back to the late Audis, is the biggest millstone around the neck of the Democrats, right? Green jobs probably means windmills, solar cells, totally obsolete, anti-economical forms of energy production that have got to be subsidized. So the more green jobs you have, the poorer you are. That's the long and the short of it. Now we have Ocasiona from northern Queens talking about Green New Deal. Now she doesn't know what it is, but she thinks there should be a select committee to figure out what it is. No thanks. No thanks. This election was decided on mass traction economic issues having to do with income inequality, the non-availability of health care, the cruelty of austerity. It was a combined backlash against Trump, sure, but also against the Satan sandwich, right? The Budget Control Act of 2011 with all of those sequesters, right? All the controls, the caps on domestic and defense and other kinds of spending. This is the big issue. If you want to test people now, right, you want a short, quick litmus test. Some Democratic candidate, right, they're running around now. They come and say, I want to run for president. Vote for me for president. What's your position on austerity? And try to pin them down, right? You want to cut Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid? You want to cut food stamps? You want to cut S-chip, WIC, other things like this? Because they'll say, we want the minimum wage to go up. That's great. But how about government spending? That's got to be maintained too. And above all, can we have some modern energy production? Not using the Don Quixote method, right? Miguel de Cervantes, around, 1600s, has Don Quixote and the windmill. The danger for the Democratic Party is that they're the new Don Quixote tilting at windmills, and it's completely crazy. And these people, right, they ran about working people, the masses, mass traction economic demands, income inequality, and so forth. And that absolutely precludes anything like regressive taxation. And the example we've been giving is, of course, the Democratic approach to infrastructure is to have it paid for by an increase in the federal gasoline tax, and a substantial one. I don't know. They don't like to tell you, but 20 cents a gallon, 25 cents a gallon? No, 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 no. And they say, well, yeah, but you got to do something for the planet. Well, let's see where that leads. In France, right, the European country that often resembles the U.S. the most, France, because it's a republic. That's the idea. It's not a monarchy, and it hasn't been one for quite a while. In France, there was part of Macron and his really foolish, suicidal. That's why I'm so worried about the Democrats. Macron can do it. They can do it too. I hope they can see from his failure. This is going to bring him down if he doesn't figure out how to turn around. Right? The typical French method is fire the prime minister and get a new policy that way. Right? This goes back to time immemorial under the Fifth Republic. So the French approach, the Macron approach, was austerity, taxing pensions. Taxing the pensions of poor people. That's great. And how about the hedge fund hyenas and zombie bankers? No, we need them. We need their innovation. We need their talent. Whoa. That is a recipe for catastrophic failure. And then let's slap a tax on gasoline and diesel fuel and a few other things so that we'll help the environment, right? Let's prove that we're not Trump. Okay, you're not Trump. But you don't need to engage in killer austerity, genocidal austerity, really, in order to do this. So we're talking now about the Yellow Vest movement, les Gilets jaunes, and they are protesting, and they're going to be protesting again this weekend. The protest is, get away from us with this gasoline and diesel tax. You want to save the environment, let the zombie bankers pay. Back in Washington, D.C. Now, we're going to show how this collapse of the Trump regime is proceeding parallel to the collapse of the Theresa May Brexit regime. In other words, we're talking about the insanity that gripped the world from mid-2016 until November 2016, which has given us the British vote for Brexit and then the May government, which is now on its last legs. And it is indispensable to see this as a transatlantic proposition and also to see the other angles involved here, right? We've talked about the French one. The yellow vests are essentially just normal people, not all right-wingers, not all Marine Le Pen. But if you let it go on, they will be. That's the problem, because it's going to be anti-Macron. She's got the only other apparatus, I would think, at the moment. So this is the perspective that the Trump regime will be swept away through whatever means, political means, of course, and the May government will also go. Just the news on that, right? Her own Chancellor of the Exchequer, her own Finance Minister or Secretary of the Treasury, Philip Hammond, has come out saying, well, any Brexit is going to mean economic suffering and hardship for the British people. If it's a hard Brexit, if they crash out with no deal with Brussels, it's going to take 10% off the gross domestic product over 15 years. So that's 10% repeated quite a few times. A huge, that's a world depression level, right? That's 1932 or 1933 levels, right? With, unbelievable astronomical unemployment, minus 10%. If you're lucky and you get a nice, smooth, conciliatory deal, it's still going to be 4% off your gross domestic product over the next 15 years. So the question, and this is what Tony Blair is trying to relaunch himself by asking, is why are you doing this? What in God's name is the point? Turn back, oh British, turn back, because we need We need you to put up an example for the world. And at that point, of course, then the Marine Le Pen and Salvini in Italy, the alternatives for Germany, God, what alternatives those are. All of this will then be cut down to size. But now, we've had a tremendous week here in Washington, D.C. I've tried to set the stage, but now let's get into the immediate, almost tactical focus. This Thursday was one of the worst days the Trump regime has ever gone through. I am thinking, what is a comparable day? Well, if you remember the day when Manafort was convicted in Alexandria, Virginia, of various frauds and things like this, bank fraud, loan fraud, mail fraud, that, and then within just a couple of hours' time, Cohen pleading guilty in the federal court in Manhattan. That was, I think, the most devastating day up to now. Well, of course, we've also had Election Day, the cumulative effect of the election, right, over a period of more than 3 weeks now. It's almost 4 weeks since that vote. So this has been the worst month. November's been the worst month for sure, especially because November contains this Thursday. Now, to give you an idea how serious this was, you know this guy Jeffrey Toobin writes for the New Yorker, and he is, and from my point of view, he is a right-wing commentator, so a center-right, let's be as charitable as we can, and is often there to tell you, not so fast, right? You think you can get Trump on this, but you can't. Spreading defeatism, I would say, disorientation, not understanding the importance of the psychological or subjective part of mass mobilization, because that's not what he's into, right? He writes for this somewhat blasé magazine of the Manhattan glitterati, and he's on CNN. But now, this time, refreshingly, on Thursday, he said, for the first time in this entire scandal, it has occurred to me that Trump may not finish his full term of 4 years in office. In other words, he may be ousted through various means. Hallelujah! We're delighted to hear that enlightenment has finally penetrated into the shadows of the New Yorker and Toobin. And then, of course, interesting, characteristically enough, because of the Jeff Zucker policy of packing every CNN broadcast with a reactionary Trump-style, irrationalist, raving fabricator, mendacious teller of tall tales, whatever, liar. Immediately we have the original Watergator, whose evolution since then has been, I think, pretty steadily to the right. This would be Bob Woodward. Bob Woodward is there to do an intervention and say at the beginning and then at the end, I think Toobin is way off base, that Trump won't finish his term. I don't know what. Is that because of book sales or whatever? You'll remember Woodward is also the guy who sat down with Michael Schmidt of the New York Times. He's also in the news this week. And said to him, Michael, do you think that you're part of a resistance against Trump? No, said Michael Schmidt, not in any way. I'm just telling what happened. So I am value-free observer. This is funny because in German, the value-free, in other words, if you're really neutral, you're value-free. So the question in German is always, is it wertlos or wertfrei? Wertfrei means neutral. Wertlos means worthless. So look at it that way. So there's the Watergator Bob Woodward trying to chasten Toobin, right? Get back into line, Toobin. the party line is that Trump is bad, but we're going to keep him around. And a lot of it is the tax cuts. You don't have to look too far. The tax cuts for the rich, the tax cuts for these corporations. So now what do we have? On Thursday, the two big things. First of all, Michael Cohen is working out his salvation, right? And we believe in redemption, and you have to, given the human condition. And that people do good things for the wrong reasons, right? If you're waiting for good things done for the right reasons, you will be waiting a long time. So here is Cohen, as he says, trying to save his family and himself, and no longer devoted to the thankless master, Trump, who never repays loyalty but only is obsessed with himself. So the revelation then from Michael Cohen is that Michael Cohen, along with others, along with, it looks like Felix Sater, with some help from a few others, they were negotiating with the Kremlin in Moscow. They were negotiating with the staff of Dmitry Peskov, Dmitry Peskov being, yes, the spokesman of Putin, but also really in some ways the number two of the regime. In some ways he's deputy. And that they were negotiating Trump Tower, Moscow, the tallest building in Europe, through about the middle of June 2016, through the entire primary season and almost to the convention. We'll be back in. Second hour of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley, PhD, speaking to you from Washington, D.C. as we come to the end of possibly the worst month, certainly the most disastrous, catastrophic debacle of the entire Trump era, if we can call it, this strange interlude of Trumpism, which, as we have been pointing out, is a freak. It is an aberration. It says very little about the underlying mentality of the American people. It came out of a perfect storm of meddling by the FBI, by the KGB and the GRU, by the New York Times, by a whole series of other factors that combined to generate this spurious 77,000 vote majority for a con man in places like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and I guess we can mention Ohio too, hoping that will be rolled back. So Thursday has been the worst day, at least since the double disaster of the Manafort conviction and the guilty plea by Cohen in the New York court, like making Trump an unindicted co-conspirator in the manner of Nixon. Well, now we've got a new month, right? Will December be even worse? That would be good for the United States, if it can be. So we want to remind you now, this is World Crisis Radio. This is the Saturday to Sunday version, the weekend show. It corresponds to the daily program, The American System. The American System is what you need to listen to Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday to get a hold of the American System and to join this community of those who know, the thinking people, the world historical individuals who know and who act. For that, you got to go to americansystem.tv, americansystem.tv, and join up. And it's simple, and it's not expensive at all. It's a token fee, but please then do go over to the AmericanSystem.tv. Now, as we say, this landmark week, what Cohen talked about, this is now Michael Cohen attempting to save himself from durance vile, where otherwise Manafort is headed, incarceration, the clink, the pen. Cohen had testified to, in the form of a letter to the House and to the Senate, saying, yeah, it's true, we were attempting to test the waters for a Trump Tower skyscraper in Moscow, the tallest building in Europe, the tallest building in Russia, tallest building in the Eastern Hemisphere, maybe, I don't know. Maybe not that. But Trump Tower. But he said, yeah, but that all ended before the primaries. That ended before New Hampshire. That ended before Iowa, right? So it was not a feature of our campaign. And now we find out he confesses, because he's forced to confess or helped along by documentary evidence, that he was in communication with people in Moscow about doing this project, carrying out this project, up until about the 14th of June of 2016. Now that is, I think, that's even after the California primary, if I'm not mistaken, but it's after the vast majority of the primary. So all that time, the primary campaign, Trump running for president, for the Republican nomination of president, and dealing under the table surreptitiously with Russia, who saw him as a commercial avenue, right, a way to launder money, but then also as a dupe, right? What better way to control the United States than to put one of your dupes into the White House? Now remember, the Trump Tower meeting, the one attended by Don Jr., who set it up, by Manafort, by Kushner. Then there was, of course, Rob Goldstone, the British music publicist, I guess, who was an emissary of the Agalarov family. This is a Russian oligarchical family, the Agalarovs, close to Putin, as all oligarchs have to be. And specifically on the ground, we had the Russian lawyer Veselnitskaya, whose cover story was always the Magnitsky Act and the difficulties then in adoption. Ike Kavaladze and Rinat Akhmetshin. And I think Kavaladze is the one who knows how to move money around, and Akhmetshin is a trained intelligence officer. So there they were. And that was the 9th of June. In the background of that, there was this negotiation going on. The last phase, the last attempt to get the Trump Tower Moscow going between the 9th and the 14th of June. And this was Cohen, aided by Individual 2. Individual 2 is Felix Sater, acting on the orders of Individual 1, that is Donald J. Trump. And they were in touch with Dmitry Peskov in the Kremlin. And again, this is a very important guy. This is far beyond Madame Hucksterby Sanders, right? She's a nobody. She doesn't count for anything. Peskov is a part of the leadership. He's a policy maker. If you want to see some of his handiwork, get a hold of the Steele dossier. Go through the Steele dossier and you'll see there's a debate in the Kremlin about, is it really wise to try to interfere in the U.S. election and install this puppet? And he has his opinion. I think he's favorable, unfortunately. But now he has been named, and it'll be interesting to hear what they say about that. So it's a very, very big deal. And Individual 1, right? Are you going to vote for Individual 1 for president? Are the Republicans going to nominate Individual 1 for another term? You can hear how difficult that is, how odd that sounds. So Cohen had sent 2 letters, one to the House Intelligence, one to the Senate Intelligence Committees, saying, oh, look, I had wrapped all this up in in January, but now Mueller has prodded him to confess that the talks were going on until June 14th, very late in the day. And we also learning delicious details of this Trump Tower, right? This skyscraper, an epic-making skyscraper that there was a penthouse on the top, and they decided to offer that penthouse as a personal gift to Putin. $50 million worth of penthouse was going to be given to Putin. Now, that is apparently, it has some of the characteristics of a bribe, and that might then violate the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. We're also told that Ivanka got involved. She was suggesting an architect. She went over there with Felix Sater and at one point sat in Putin's swivel chair in his strategic office inside the Kremlin fortress. And Don Jr. also involved in this. So isn't that interesting? It's very damaging. And of course, you think all the times that Trump has loudly paraded that he has no dealings with Russia, no dealings, no deals, no loans, no money, no nothing, knows nothing of Russia. All lies, 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 lies. He's practically the father of lies at this point, wouldn't you say? Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Web Shop here in Washington, D.C. Remember, AmericanSystem.tv, AmericanSystem.tv. Follow us Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. You'll be glad you did. You will know more. You will know in depth. Cognitio per causas, knowledge of things according to their causes. So this was very bad news. It was stunning. It was Cohen then giving an allocution in the Southern District of New York, right? Foley Square, that neoclassical building with the columns. And he added that he did this for Trump and that he did it to try to shield or protect Trump and his family from the blowback of what the truth might have meant for them. And in particular, it means Ivanka and Don Jr. The $50 million story comes through other means, other sources, but that's, again, Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Now, look at this. The first thing is, Robert Mueller is an integral part of the national defense of the United States. Perhaps more than any aircraft carrier group, he is protecting this country. You may remember that when Trump was already on his way to the Helsinki sellout summit with Putin, during the time that Trump was on his way, already in the air, so to speak, this was when the special counsel came forward with that indictment naming a dozen officers of the Russian GRU military intelligence service, saying these are the ones who hacked the Democratic National Committee. Here's how they did it. Here's more or less when they did it. So it meant that whatever Trump had imagined for that infamous sellout summit of appeasement, that groveling and bootlicking for the dictator Putin, that was put under a cloud. So it's like the administration, Trump and his gang, right, along with Bolton and Pomposo and the rest of them, they are devoted to appeasement. But there's Mueller who puts the brakes on appeasement. He makes it harder. He circumscribes it. He cuts the appeasement policy down to size. And I guess you've had, he's done that again now, right, with Trump on his way. Presumably, the original intent was he would meet with Putin. After all of this came out, Trump got cold feet, right? He got on the plane, and then before too long, out came an announcement from the White House. Oh, the meeting with Putin is canceled. It's canceled. Well, it's canceled. The Russians say it has actually happened. It's not clear, right? That our feeling is that Trump is going to try very hard to have this meeting somehow, surreptitiously, in disguise, wearing a false mustache, right? Like those voters. He's an expert in disguise, right? Those voter fraud people in his imagination. But he's going to try to meet with MBS. He's going to meet with Xi. That's going to be going on in I guess Saturday evening, and he's up to no good. So anyway, now he's knocked back on his heels, and the brakes have been put on for Trump. Now, interestingly, the spokeswoman of the Russian Foreign Ministry, this is Madame Zakharova. Madame Zakharova says, well, this was done for internal reasons. Internal reasons. Yeah. We've been showing this week that Putin's behavior is also profoundly influenced by internal reasons, internal Russian considerations. Putin has unmasked himself as an austerity ghoul. He wants to add 5 years to the age where you can get your pension. That is to say, the Russians, the poor, long-suffering Russian people who lived through shock therapy at the beginning of the 1990s, the reign of Yeltsin, the reign of Chubais, the reign of Prime Minister Gaidar, the rapacious young wolves, Nemtsov, certainly one of them, the young reformers, as they were called, right? 0 hour for the Russian middle class, lining up at the metro stops. I've seen them. I was there trying to sell some family belongings so that they could get their next bowl of soup for the family. So those people who have already been victimized once by hyperinflation in 1992, then again by the collapse of the banking system, right? The so-called GKO Treasury bill bankruptcy of 1998, right? The long-term capital management and related stuff. So this is now a generation that has been taken to the cleaners twice, not once, but twice. And now they're supposed to wait another 5 years. Keep on working. Keep on working. And of course, this is a country where if you want to talk about income inequality, oh my God, this is the world capital of oligarchy. It really is true that the internal social order of the U.S., bad as it is, disastrous as it is still better than the oligarchical system in Russia. So Madame Zakharova says, hey, Trump, you claim that you're doing this because you don't approve of the way Putin is handling the Kerch Strait, Sea of Azov issue, the relations with Ukraine, and so forth. But this is really domestic politics. Yeah. Tukukwe, Zakharova. Yours is the same story. Putin is on an adventurous course because his popularity has fallen by about 20 points, according to various things from the Levada group, and we know we're taking that with a grain of salt. The Levada group and others, they show that only 40% of Russian voters want Putin or would vote for Putin again. 77% voted for him back in March. And he got that, he won. It's kind of like Macron. He got in there, and then he said, guess what? It's time for austerity. Well, no, it's not time for austerity. This is the one thing. It's never time for austerity. Austerity is anti-economical. So anyway, Trump claims that he won't meet Putin, but we're pretty sure that he'll find a way. And we'll be back in just a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Epster Tuppy here on the banks of the autumnal Potomac. So that's the Cohen story, right? That 1-2 punch. Cohen says, I was talking all the way until June, right? It was June in January. and I was still talking. He claimed it was January, but it was actually June, so he was confused. No, it was June. It was June 14th was apparently the last demonstrable contact about the Trump Tower. Moscow, the $50 million penthouse, the role of the Ivanka and Don Jr., who are in difficulty anyway. Now, as we said, Mueller has had a tendency to interfere. He's doing the work of the country. When Trump and company went to Saudi Arabia, there were revelations about Kushner and his collusion activity. Then we had a trip to Poland and Germany. That was marred by revelations about Don Jr. Well, these, of course, are going on all the time. You don't have to posit any particular targeting. When Trump went for Bastille Day 2017, this was then the Trump Tower meeting and that fake communique. When Trump went to Davos in January of 2018, it was revealed that he had tried to fire Mueller. In July of this past year, this was Helsinki when we said it, the 12 GRU officers, and now we've got this. So we got about half a dozen cases. But, of course, this is basically every week under Trump is some new revelation. But this is particularly welcome. You got to imagine, Sir Neville Chamberlain went to Munich and sold out Czechoslovakia to Hitler. And because the French could not stand alone without Britain and the British fleet, he was essentially handing continental Europe over to Hitler. And he got away with this, right, at least in the very short run. But he stayed in office then for another couple of years, right? He was not ousted right away. Imagine if back in London there had been a special prosecutor, an investigator, a lawman, a cop, in effect, saying, I'm going to ride herd on you, Sir Neville Chamberlain, because I know that you have nefarious relations, maybe, I'm just guessing now, making up an example. The IG Farben cartel has been talking to you, and so on and so forth, right? If Neville Chamberlain had been forced to look over his shoulder to see if a lawman was coming after him on the domestic front, this might have put the brakes on some of the horrors of the Munich sellout of 80 years ago this past September. So that is what Mueller's doing. He's providing not just a domestic check on Trump, but necessarily on his foreign policy. It is widely observed that when Trump arrives in Argentina at the Buenos Aires G20, he does this as a weakened, shocked, lame duck figure. Weak, defeated, minority, essentially it's like he's lost the equivalent of a vote of confidence. He doesn't have a working majority in the Congress anymore. He's going to be checked. He's going to be balanced. Now, the other thing, though, to point out, we love edifying stories, but we can't be blind. Felix Sater, individual 2, we know all this stuff, right? Michael Cohen, Felix Sater, classmates, I think in early years of school in Brooklyn. 2 boys from Brooklyn who were going to build the tallest building, who were going to put their boy Trump into the White House, and we're going to get Putin and the oligarchs on board. These 2, but Sater is a very key guy. And the thing you have to know is, according to all published accounts, Sater is also someone who informs, who provides information for the FBI. So what we have to wonder here is, didn't the FBI, thanks to the presence of Sater, know that this was all going on? And why didn't the FBI do something? I mean, leak it would have been the obvious thing. But they didn't do that. So we're left again with this idea that the FBI, in terms of doing something to fight against the Trump takeover, the Trump coup, in effect, they're very feckless, aren't they? I think they're pretty feckless when you get right down to it, right? And we've talked about the New York City field office of Giuliani loyalists and Hillary haters, and therefore Trump backers. They were leaking like mad, all against Hillary. Oh, she's going to be indicted. This got on Fox News. You know these stories. And if anybody in the FBI had wanted to harm Trump, the obvious way to do it is leak the fact that after the very end of July, as we got into August, that there was an FBI investigation of him. Thank God, better late than never after all this. So those, I think, are the considerations. That Sater indicates that the FBI knew or should have known about this, and then why didn't they do something, for God's sake? And they didn't. So that's of course, that's on Comey. He was the head of it at the time. Now then, we've got interesting stories. We're told by the Guardian of London that Assange met with Manafort. It's plausible. We don't know. We're going to stay tuned on that one. And then we've got Corsi. This is now what we call the Court of Miracles. The Court of Miracles is a coterie. It's not really homogeneous. It's just sort of a bunch of people that can be linked somehow to Roger Stone, right? And there they are. And they, a lot of them, well, just all of them have been grilled by the special prosecutor. And it's the Manhattan Madam, it's Roger Stone, it's Credico, it's a bunch of characters who have made some money on cable news. And, Corsi, right? So what do we know about Corsi? Corsi had testified to the special counsel. We know this because the plea deal has been leaked, right? Corsi leaked it. He didn't sign it. He scorned it, and he leaked it. So Corsi was told by person one, thought to be Stone. I'll be saying hereinafter Stone, but it's person one in the court document. Stone asked Corsi to get in touch with Organization One. That's hereinafter, that's WikiLeaks, Assange. Corsi did not say no. He got in touch with an individual in London, England, overseas individual. This is thought to be a guy called Malak, a friend of Farage, a Brexiteer, and passed on the request. We want to know, what do you have about Hillary, right? If you've hacked the DNC, what did you find out? Corsi then told person one, Stone, that WikiLeaks possessed information that would be damaging to Hillary Clinton and that this would come out in October, which it did. So the message is, well, we'll give you a little sample of this in a minute. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Topley in Washington, D.C. So with that was the story with Corsi, and the key email is Stone tells him, call me on Monday, and then on August 2nd, Corsi responds to Stone by email, I'm in Europe. The word is that friend in embassy, Assange, plans 2 more dumps, one soon after I get back to the U.S., the second one in October. Impact plan to be very damaging, and try to make it broader than just Hillary, but go include the campaign chairman. That would be Podesta. And so that's a bunch of communications that they've gotten. So the accusation here, once again, is that Corsi lied to the investigating committee. Now, this is really interesting because there's been a parade of all sorts of Trump backers through those 2 committees. in the House committee, Nunes practically said, go ahead and say whatever you want. We don't care. We don't care about, essentially, let's have perjury. And he was suborning perjury. What can we say? And, the idea was that there'd be no reckoning for this. But now if the Democrats come in and say, let's go back and review all of that testimony, there are a lot of Trump backers who will find themselves in very, very hot water, and they deserve to be. Now, a couple of economic points. There can be a government shutdown within about a week. December 7th could be Trump's new Pearl Harbor, the new Pearl Harbor. The real new Pearl Harbor is what Trump can do by shutting down the U.S. government because he wants at least $5 billion. That's enough to run WIC, right, the high-protein meals for pregnant women and nursing mothers. You could do a lot of S-chip, right, child health insurance and so forth. $5 billion wasted on this idiotic wall, right? It's like the Maginot Line, right? The Maginot Line. It's not going to help you. I mean, there's a complicated story about that, but get the idea. You're putting your money in the wrong place if this is all you do. So let's see. This is a point where, as we're trying to argue at the beginning, Trump's total top-down lockstep control over these Republican zombies on Capitol Hill may be breaking up. Here's a place where you're going to see it. Now, the other thing, the very damaging thing this week for Trump, General Motors, in the person of Mary Barra, their boss, says we're going to close 5 auto plants and we're going to destroy 15,000 jobs. And apparently they have 100,000 workers, so that's 15%. They're going to be destroying a factory in Warren, Michigan, in Lordstown, Ohio, one in Ontario. So it's a disaster. Notice, of course, despite Don's endless jawboning, that they do not close any factories in Mexico or China. Those stay open. And they say, well, those are the wrong models. So retool, you characters. So the Trump model was to say, yeah, huge corporate tax breaks, tax cuts for the rich, deregulation, wild, savage deregulation, plus a complete scorn of labor laws, right? Let the union busters run wild. That's Trump's model. And, of course, then scapegoat the immigrants, scapegoat Central America, sort of the caravan. And that's a winning combination to revive manufacturing, a new industrial renaissance in the United States. Nothing of the kind. Don't be a sucker. How dumb can anybody be? Now, we're happy to hear that Sherrod Brown, the senator from Ohio, is he's being encouraged, as he points out, to run for president. Well, this would be a blue-collar America, at least in the profile that he's adopting. I think the guy went to Yale, but right now he's a blue-collar representative, and I think he is much more seriously than Trump actually doing these things. This is the place where Sherrod Brown comes in, right? So what's with Sherrod Brown? He's saying, look, the reason that this is attractive, right? The reason that General Motors is doing what they're doing, they're closing the plants in the U.S. and they're keeping the plants in China and in Mexico open, is because of the Republican tax scam, Trump's tax scam. You remember during the course of the approval of this back October, November, December of last year, we were told that the U.S. has an extraterritorial tax system, and that was bad, and therefore we had to go over to a territorial tax system. Now, the extraterritorial means if you're a corporation with headquarters in the United States, wherever you have profits and production, you got to pay some tax on that here in the United States. Oh, how old-fashioned. So many countries around the world, it's a fad. They've gone over to a purely territorial tax system. Your headquarters are in the U.S. Only your U.S. profits can be taxed. You may own other production elsewhere in the world, but no U.S. tax can be collected on that. So guess what? As anybody could see at the time, as we said here, that encourages the wild export of jobs. It's a subsidy. It's a subsidy to export jobs. So Sherrod Brown has been doing yeoman service by saying that the net effect of the Republican tax scam has been to take the 21% corporate tax that General Motors and others are theoretically paying now on U.S. production, but on the money coming in from overseas, it cuts that tax bill in half. I guess this is transitional, or this was the final result of the dirty compromises in the last hours. And we're just now hearing prominently about how destructive this is. So you have production in the U.S., you got to pay 21% on the profits. But if it's coming in from Mexico or China, 10.5%. So it's a 50% tax cut on the profits of foreign manufacturing for General Motors. So these people are obviously not eagles. They're not heroes. They are thoroughly sleazy individuals, I would say. And this, of course, is so ironic, right? The United States government bailed you out. You have been helped by this tax cut, and the result of that is that you don't care about the national interest. You're simply going to follow the logic of profit. Now, this is where profound reforms are needed, cultural reforms and so forth, but the entire entrepreneurial class of rip-off speculators, right? These are people who are finance oligarchs, hedge fund hyenas, zombie bankers in their mentality. These are not industrialists, right? This is not industrial capitalism. This is this misbegotten kind of financial speculative stock jobbing capitalism. Now, this was such a bad week for Trump. On one occasion, Fox News was going back to the Epstein case, right? Guilty of molesting young girls, spent some time, very short time in prison, and they pointed out that it was the current Labor Secretary Acosta who had allowed him to do it, right? So they were so desperate that they had to even start attacking the Trump cabinet in order to get anywhere. Notice we put out, look on the Twitter, the Federal Reserve has issued a statement saying that there's now the danger of a particularly large drop in asset prices. Says the Fed, particularly large drop in asset prices will be following that. So don't believe that stopping the interest rate hikes or slowing them down is going to bring on singing crows. It will not. So with that, we have come to the end of our time for Saturday program. Join us at theamericans.tv.